Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting. Today, we are going to be discussing an issue that quite a few of you have raised, actually over the past year or so. And we have been taking some time and dedicating, as I said last meeting, to really thinking about this, discussing it as a board of administrators, and then linking up, as many of you have been involved in certain interviews and discussions about some of the issues that we have seen in our middle school classroom. So I'm looking forward to going over some of the solutions we've provided today. As with all change and solutions, it can be challenging. You'll have questions, and we will make adjustments as we go along. But I hope that together we can come through this and find a way to keep our focus on the most important people here, which are our students. Without further ado, let's jump in. Let's talk about what your middle school classroom looks like. We know as middle school teachers, we have this unique group of children. They are not high schoolers who are fully capable of rhetoric, as we know that's kind of that third stage. They're getting there. High schoolers have decided that they are independent and they have embraced it fully, whereas middle schoolers are this weird blend of I'm no longer dependent, but I'm not sure how to be independent, and they're trying to figure it out. Today will not be to go into all of the unique challenges that are there teaching in a middle school, although we know they are many. We're going to talk about one thing, and one thing that seems small, but actually ends up taking up most of a middle school teacher's time, which is the constant movement within your classroom. In elementary classrooms, they are structured and moving towards a place of having stations, constant movement, breaks for physical activity. But yet, when we jump into middle school, we treat them like high school as far as the way they function academic-wise. So they go from class to class to class. They have one section of PE, maybe 2, 3, depending on the semester, a week. They have recess, but it's limited, often missed if they have makeup work to do or whatever the case may be. So part of that, plus just the general nature of middle schoolers, although if we're being honest, oftentimes specifically middle school boys, is that we see a non-stop movement, which is understandable. Challenging as a teacher, but understandable when we look at kind of what they're trying to adjust to. So many of you are seeing constant arm movement and flailing, yelling across the room of seemingly innocuous things, although we just don't know because we don't know what it is that they're referencing. Just a student falling out of their chair. High school teachers are uniquely sheltered from some of these bizarre challenges, but I do know, as some of you have spoken in one of my observations, I distinctly remember the teacher was talking, I was watching the students, and all of a sudden, one of the students just fell out of their chair for seemingly no reason, and then they jumped back in, and it was fine. But the reality is, some of you are chuckling, but the reality is this is what middle school teachers deal with. And they deal with it beautifully, and they handle it. You guys are incredible. You are an incredible group of teachers dealing with a very odd challenge. Elementary teachers can sympathize with it, but they don't necessarily quite have the level of sass that also comes and developed thought that we're seeing here. So we have this very unique group, and I want to try to address 3 major ways through research and through just kind of determining some of the best ways to move forward that we can kind of mitigate some of these concerns, okay? So let me talk about, if you're sitting there going, probably most of you already know many of the concerns because you've either shared them with me or you've shared them amongst yourselves or you've just kept them internally. But I'm going to bring up some of the ones that I've seen happen a lot and tell you why, as administration, we not only want to support you in this, but see it as a huge issue school-wide, and we'll talk about that why in a moment. So 3/5 of referrals for lunch detentions can link directly back to some type of bizarre movement. We know in our system of discipline here at this school, we reserve lunch detentions for those issues. They are disciplinary issues. They caused you to do something that was not what's expected within the classroom. But they're not necessarily overt disrespect, right? They're the challenge in between. But it's also reserved for missing homework assignments, those types of things. But It says lunch detention, but I think we can also say, when we've looked at the numbers, 3/5 of all detention referrals is really what this should be referencing here, linked directly back to movement within the classroom, at least in the middle school. So it either refers back to students being out of their seat when they were supposed to be in their seat, students facing the absolute wrong direction, which, maybe some high school teachers would say, well, yeah, students sometimes have their head down. We just aren't that strict about it. That's not what we're talking about in middle school. We're talking about somehow they're backwards in their seat. And I don't know when it happened. Students damaging classrooms material through just mismanagement of their arms. So raise your hand right now if you're a teacher in here whose student has broken one of their Chromebooks in the last 3 years. Most of you, all except 2 of you. Because when they're on their tiny little desks, they're just not always in control. So how do we deal with this very real problem while still showing grace and sympathy to the fact that students are coming into their body at this stage? They're figuring out who they are and their abilities in light of that. So we're going to talk about proactive plans versus reactive plans. This isn't new. This is something we've talked about many times when it comes to discipline workshops, but we often don't think of this as one of those issues that we can combat. We think of it as like, well, it's just a stage. And through the research that I and the team that we've kind of put together on this task force, so to speak, have come to, we've realized that we really need to have a proactive system for dealing with the discipline related to constant movement in the middle school classroom. When we're always reacting, I don't know that we're actually teaching them anything new, because this is the reality. Some of it is willful neglect of what you have just said. But if we're all being honest, and I've heard this talking to each and every single one of you, a lot of these students just don't even realize what they're doing half the time. It's like their body has a mind of its own. Or it's just a stumble, or it's something that seems like that was a ridiculous way to fall, or why did you fall? But if you were in your seat like you were supposed to, you wouldn't have. All completely understandable, and you have done nothing wrong in referring these as discipline problems. But I would love to find, as a school, as a middle school, how we can proactively handle this versus reactively handle it. So how do we prevent the problems in the first place? So here's some of the benefits of an active classroom. Having movement integration. I'm going to talk about what that means specifically in a moment. But there's been plenty of studies. This down here, you can see some references. I have all the references in the back for you as well. Talk about that they looked at study after study after study, and there are countless studies that have been done about this. Most in the elementary classroom, but I think they applied pretty appropriately to our middle school classroom. That active classrooms, as I'll define in a moment, improve standardized testing scores. Pretty systematically. I'm going to show you that more in the last slide. They increase on-task behavior, which we know is a huge challenge for middle school students. Positively improve body mass index. That may not be on the top of your list when you're thinking through what is it that we want to do as teachers, how do we help these challenges, but allow me to explain how that might help us. Enhance cognitive functioning. Physical activity outside of educational research and inside of educational research is almost always linked to enhanced cognitive functioning, whether it be in our aging citizens or whether it be in very young children or in students in any realm of the classroom. Enhanced cognitive functioning is frequently seen in studies, and at the most, in every study I looked at, and I looked at many, the least I saw that indicated this was that they weren't entirely sure what level of physical activity linked to the cognitive functioning, but none denied that there was a link. Increased enjoyment and perceived competence. All of these, and these were just 5 of many in a list, that were benefits of active classrooms. So now you're wondering, well, what is this active classroom and what does it mean for me? Well, let me start at a broader level, okay? So let's talk about school-wide changes. These are changes that, although you will be a part of the enforcing and explanation of, you will not actually have to physically do anything within these changes within your classroom to change it up, okay? So we're going to have structured physical events at recess for at least 10 minutes. We're hoping that we allow these, if we see them kind of take off, to be something that's longer, but we also know the challenge of the fact that to middle schoolers, nothing's cool if the teachers have to put it on. So we know that. So we're going to just be requiring 10 minutes of that recess time. So for those of you who are here as teachers right now going, wait, I monitor recess, does that mean I have to be doing this? No, what we're doing is pooling aides. We have kind of determined the aides who are not needed at their post at that current moment. We've pulled them for these 10-minute segments. If it becomes longer, we'll discuss what that looks like, maybe even allow teachers to have options within it. But structured physical events at recess is going to be something we're looking at. Walking, soccer games, game stations, etc. Walking is for those who really have no interest in the physical activity. There's not a sport they're interested in, but they would rather just be sitting and talking. That's fine. Now they can stand and walk and talk. We're not going to keep them from hanging out with their friends. We just want them to be physically active while doing it. Lunch detentions are no longer allowed in the sense that you can have the lunch detention portion, so they can come, some of you have them eat with you at lunch. We kind of rotate the rooms in which that happens. That's okay, because they would have been sitting anyway. Although we do think that socialization component's really important, so we're hesitant. But we are very, very much resisting the idea of long recess detentions, no longer allowing those. So perhaps we can discuss. We're still kind of figuring out exactly what that's going to look like, and we'd love to hear your feedback. We actually have a survey at the end of class. We'd like to hear from each of you, not just how you feel about it, do you like it or not. We know that this could pose some challenges, especially because it's been used by us, and it's been the system in place. There's no fault for using it. But we see this as a really big problem when the students who already are posing the type of problems that get them the lunch detention referrals, then don't get out and get physically active. And I'll talk about that more, the study at the bottom, in just a moment. And we're also going to have gym available during indoor recess. So whenever it's cold out, none of us want to go out. There's actually limitations on when we can let them out. But what does that mean for us? That means you have students who are already tired of sitting all day, sitting for another chunk of time that they would have been out being physically active. So this is going to be open. We've rearranged certain schedules. There's very few days where the gym is even a problem, but we have figured out a way we've brought the dividers in. That's been in the budget for a while, but we've brought in the dividers to be able to split the gym so that there's availability during recess. So let's talk about this. This study at the bottom, you can see the people who are associated with it, also a more recent study, but a recent study that analyzed studies, you can look, they reference 72 other studies in that one, and each of those refer to how cognitive functioning is very linked to more physical activity. So we're seeing these connections and thinking as administration, well, then what are we doing when we're limiting it? So when it's a punishment that you don't get to have the physical activity, especially because we've seen that a huge portion of the lunch detention referrals are boys. And if you look at the playground, the ones who are typically the ones not sitting around, they're running around, they're moving, are our boys. So we're removing that from them by structuring certain elements of recess. And I use structure loosely. If their students already play basketball, they can still play basketball, but it'll be a physical activity time. Essentially, if you're sitting talking, you now need to walk for 10 minutes, just kind of enforce. They will hate it. But when we are seeing study after study after study that is seeing a link between physical activity and cognitive functioning, we cannot deny it. The other thing that we're seeing, and you can see this in the study if you look at it, is that there is a very huge connection between eating healthy and exercising and readiness to learn. Also, attention spans, exhaustion. These are obvious to some of us because many of you are good about what you eat. You're physically active. You know it's important for you as a teacher. How much more so for young, growing students who a lot of times now are at home on devices when they get home, whether it's even just for homework. Maybe it's not, maybe it's not video games or anything like that, but we're having a generation of students who are not moving the way they need to. So for the sake of their academics, we need to institute it here at our school. So that's the school-wide changes that'll be happening. You will not actually at this moment have to be doing anything different except for how we handle recess detentions. You will not be allowed to do those. You'll be allowed to do lunch, which may mean that you have to, we can discuss this, like I said in the poll. If you have a suggestion, I have a suggestion box in that survey you're all going to complete for an alternative. We'd love to hear from you guys. We have ideas, but you are the ones at the forefront, and we want to hear what your ideas are and move forward in them. Okay. So then here is another change. Once again, you will be a part of the change, but you do not have to design it, although we will be asking for some of you to jump in on this, on the designing. So this study at the bottom shows links to studying anything with like rote memorization and a physical activity component. Some of you have done this before, especially a few of you have taught in the elementary level. You've done activities where there's hand signals to go with it, right? I remember seeing one of you teach doing the amendments to the Constitution, and each one had some kind of symbol. I remember you being concerned about the hand gestures when it came to the Second Amendment. So I know you already use some of these. Well, our home-based curriculum is very elementary in the way it's designed. In our middle school, we like to have a lot of discussions, engaged learning, but this is the one class we still do that's very much about memorization. So whether it's spelling words and most of you teach a home-based class with your homeroom. There's a few of you as I'm looking around who are like, not sure what you're talking about, Rebecca, but okay, I'll listen. Because you may at some point have a homeroom. And if you do, you teach this curriculum. The curriculum is very straightforward. It's a short class, and it rotates. So some days you're teaching, you're reviewing, I shouldn't say teaching, reviewing your spelling words and doing games. All of you have awesome games that you've put into place. I'm not trying to change any of that. What we do want to do is include physical activities, specifically workout type activities that are associated with it. So here's an example. Mr. James over there, I know that you guys play silent ball when you are doing your spelling words. So you throw it and you have to say a letter for each of those. And when you say the letter, you have to spell it. If they spell it wrong, they're out, right? It's not really silent ball because you're spelling, but I know what the base of that is. That's a great physical activity. So what we're also going to do is the step before, the step that doesn't have the games you've all created. I'm not messing any of that up. The initial stuff where you just are going over the spelling words with them, you're going to include a physical component to it. So maybe that's jumping jacks while they spell out the words for the first time. So every letter they do a jack or a jump, whatever. I don't know the term so well, but I know how to do a jumping jack. Or they have to run from one side of the room to the other every time they list all of the countries in Africa. And then they run to the other side of the room, and then you move on to the capitals in North America, right? So when you get to different sections, you just get them moving. We'll have that all ready. This will be rolling out next year. We want to ask any home-based teachers who'd be interested in trying to figure out a physical component to that to come and discuss it with us. And we're going to actually recreate the curriculum to have that written in, right? So every time they get to spelling, they know, oh, okay, today in spelling, we're going over our spelling words for the first time. We're going to have to do jumping jacks during it. It's an actual just connection between the two. If you have ideas for how to create symbols to go along with it, you can. That would probably work better with our geography component, considering that remains static, whereas the spelling words change from week to week. You can do that. But we are going to plan that. Just know that that's rolling out. So if you're a home-based teacher, you don't have to do the jumping jacks, although we encourage you to do it. But that is going to be something that we have associated with each type of rote memorization. If you'd like to bring that into your other classrooms, you can. But I'm going to tell you one way this is going to affect you a little bit more in your regular classrooms. Okay? And that's our final stage here in how we're altering this. Okay. Take 10. Some of you have heard of this program, this initiative, but we actually are taking it from elementary. We're not going to use the Take 10 program. We have talked to Take 10. This is a program that was designed many, many years ago, where they started incorporating 10 minutes into every classroom, where at least one activity, it initially started with taking 10 minutes out to work out. A lot of teachers complained, rightfully so, because they said, we already don't have enough time to cover our curriculum. How in the world are we supposed to take 10 minutes out of the limited time we have? And we as administrators are sympathetic. So if your sirens are going off and you're going, whoa, 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 rein it in, we don't have 10 minutes to take out of each class. That's not actually what we're asking you to do. We have talked to Take 10 because they've adapted their curriculum over time and what they stand for. And one of the things that they do is they partner with schools to determine a course of action. Now, they're really only focused on elementary, so we're going to kind of do our own version of this, but with a rep. They take a lesson that you're going to teach and figure out how to add a component that gets the kinesthetic element, gets them moving around. Okay, so let me give you some examples. Okay, this is what we're looking for. There are examples that I've seen. I've actually seen some of you doing this. I saw Miss Snyder, I saw you do this the other week. You were doing similes versus metaphors, and you moved the desks. You had the students stand in the middle, and you gave a statement, right? Quiet as a mouse. And they had to run to the right side of the room, right? So was it a simile or a metaphor? Then they came back to the middle, and you did it again with another. It was true chaos, and it was loud. But they loved it, and they were engaged, and they noticed when they weren't doing the right one. It was very physically apparent. I saw someone else do an activity where they were simulating. I think this was Mr. Gregg. Correct me if I'm wrong. Many of you are doing this already. So they created an activity where they had different stations that represented different countries along the Silk Trade route. And he had them moving, doing an activity at each station and trading to see how things moved across the country. It was very physical representation. It was an excellent lesson. But he also added extra components to it. So all of a sudden he'd call out war over, and he'd list the area. And everyone there had to just drop to the ground, right? And then he listed on this side, like, plague over here, and they had to drop to the ground to show how trade could halt in certain areas. He never gave up lesson time. But in fact, I have heard students talk about some of those activities still today. And then when you question them further, they remember some elements of the lesson. We know that they're not going to remember everything of each of our lessons, but the ones that stick in their mind are the ones that are related, as I go back to the beginning, to their cognitive functioning and physical activity are related. But this reference down here that I have for you actually refers to the constant studies that have been done on these types of activities, specifically born out of this Take 10 idea, was what this study was about, but there are plenty of others, about how linking what you're teaching to something that gets students moving can keep them on task far more, which seems counterintuitive. I see some of your faces. Some of you are very resistant, and understandably so, because you think, I can't trust my student to come in the classroom and sit in their seat. How am I going to trust them to get up and run from one end of the room to the other? This is my encouragement to you. So this is not a full rollout, but what this is going to look like is in the next year when you're starting to do your lesson plans, we're going to ask that 3 times a week, whichever class structure you want to do it in, so if you teach English and social studies, you can just do it in your English classes or just do it in your social studies. 3 times a week, find a lesson. Doesn't have to be a huge portion of the lesson, but that you get them moving. It can be something starting small, where when they're doing peer feedback, you jigsaw it. So they're sitting side to side, and every time it's done, get up, and they each move one direction the other way, all the way around. It's a small thing, but it's movement. That, over the course of a whole period, would amount to about 10 minutes of your class that they're moving. We don't think that's enough, ultimately, to be a proactive system to combat discipline problems that have to do with physical movement, but it helps. There's so much research that backs students moving helps. Look at what's happening in elementary schools. You don't see this behavioristic model that there used to be. If you're concerned that you can't get your middle schoolers to do this, think about, poor Miss Kathy, who's got all of those 3-year-olds, right? Yet she still does activities that create movement constantly in her classroom and reins them back in. I'm not trying to compare your middle schoolers to 3-year-olds, but sometimes it can feel like it. We know it. But it helps all the way through elementary schools. Every elementary school that I know of is going that direction. Why not middle schools? Our students still have the same challenges. Especially our boys. They are really struggling with not having the kinesthetic elements within our lessons. We've taken these young kids who, 3 months before, when it was June, were in very engaged and movement-based classes, and then brought them 3 months later and expect them to sit still for period after period after period with limited gym, limited recess. So we're hoping with these system-wide plans that we have in place, we can really mitigate some of these concerns. But we know that it'll take time. So for next year, we want you to find 10 minutes within 3 lessons a week. So that's 30 minutes in total. It's not enough. We want it to be more. Well, we want you to prove it to yourself to see how it can work. We are going to take our next PD day solely to focus on this. You'll be broken up into departments, and we're going to have teachers that we have already seen really doing that in other areas, kind of help to foster the conversation there, maybe bring in some ideas. If you come and you're like, I've never done this before, there's no shame in that. That's okay. That's not how we were taught to teach. Many of us were not taught that way. I certainly wasn't when I was in school. And now as I'm seeing shifts within education, we're seeing it go a different direction. And I think we need to be at the forefront of middle schoolers involving themselves in kinesthetic learning, beyond just touching a science experiment. This needs full body movement. I'm not asking you beyond home base to institute, get up and do 10 jumping jacks, right? Although I have seen some teachers do it and it can be really effective to wake their students up. But there's certain triggers of movement that move them from one side to the other that have been proven time and time again to be effective within the classroom. If it's something you're specifically concerned about after we've had our PD day and you're testing and you're thinking, yeah, but I don't trust my students to be able to do this, ask me to come in and I'll be there. I'll help to try to start the process and see how it goes. And then I'll see firsthand where some of our concerns are and we can deal with it. And so I really look forward to how we're going to roll out each of these ideas just for a refresher. First, on a school-wide level, that's going to be something that you don't have to physically do beyond informing the students it exists. Altering home-based curriculum, again, I'm looking for some of you to come join me in creating that very physically linked element. It doesn't actually have to make sense in the sense that jumping jacks don't necessarily have anything to do with spelling unless you're spelling the word jumping jacks or exercise. But we're linking just the physical movement with the cognitive development and memory. We've seen links with research. And then finally, 10 minutes 3 times a week within your classroom. That part of your 10 minutes of each lesson 3 times a week needs to have some kind of physical movement component. Well, thank you guys all for being here. I'll be available for questions afterwards. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you all. Don't forget to fill out your surveys.